AI requires a lot of compute power, and the cost for your AI workloads can spiral. That is, unless you're running on OCI, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. This was the cloud built for AI, a blazing fast, enterprise-grade platform for your infrastructure, database apps, and all of your AI workloads.
Right now, Oracle can cut your current cloud bill in half if you move to OCI. Minimum financial commitment and other terms apply. Offer ends March 31st. See if you qualify at oracle.com/WSJTech. Oracle.com/WSJTech.
Good afternoon. Getting right down to business here in Los Angeles. We're doing it live right here. Mottek On Money, 790 KABC. Streaming live online worldwide at KABC.com. And yes, the on-demand Mottek On Money podcast, KABC.com, Apple, iTunes, YouTube, all of your favorite podcast platforms. Coming in hot today, the latest reading on inflation, the Consumer Price Index coming in hotter than expected. First thing this morning, an hour ahead of the opening bell on Wall Street, reinforcing the idea that the Fed will be in no hurry to lower short-term interest rates anytime soon. In reaction, stocks finished mostly lower today after the January hotter than expected Consumer Price Index. We also saw an aggressive sell-off of U.S. Treasuries with the yield in the 10-year note hitting a nearly 3-week high. The Consumer Price Index, that important reading on inflation, rose 3% for the year ending January, according to the Labor Department today. The January reading is up from 2.9% in December. It's also the fourth consecutive month of increases in the annual inflation rate when it was 2.4% in September. I'll discuss the inflation story and the whole works coming up shortly with the one and only Steve Forbes, who's standing by on the line. The Dow and S&P 500 saw their first declines in 3 trading sessions. The Nasdaq managed a closing gain of 6 points. The Dow tumbled 225, the S&P 500 down 16. We did see stocks trim sharp early declines, getting a lift after President Trump announced that Russia agreed to begin talks to end the war in Ukraine. Analysts also pointing to reports that the House Speaker said he believed President Trump was considering exemptions to reciprocal tariffs for industries including cars and pharmaceuticals. Fed Chairman Jerome Powell back on Capitol Hill today for the second day in a row, basically repeating what he said yesterday, this time before the House Financial Services Committee, saying he supports a change to bank capital rules that's been on the industry's wish list. Taking a look at the price of gold, it continues to hover at or near record highs with inflation flaring up again. We'll take a closer look at that. Oil, meanwhile, pulling back. And we're going to be taking a closer look at oil today. The price of oil slipping to $71.27 in New York, and the benchmark, global benchmark Brent crude in London is just below $75 a barrel. President Trump announcing today he had a highly productive phone call with Russian President Vladimir Putin, and both were open to immediate talks to end the war in Ukraine, according to the Wall Street Journal. This also impacted the oil markets today. Also, Chevron, which has announced plans to move its headquarters out of California and move to Houston, has also announced today they plan to lay off between 15 to 20% of its employees starting this year. Chevron vowing to save between $2 billion and $3 billion by next year, and Chevron disclosing layoffs as part of that plan. A federal judge clearing the way now for President Trump's plan to downsize the federal workforce with a deferred resignation program. A federal judge in Boston finding a group of labor unions did not have legal standing to challenge that program, commonly described as a buyout. New attention on how public funds are being spent in Los Angeles on the homeless crisis. LA's top city homeless services executive, the chief executive of the LA Homeless Services Authority, LAHSA, reportedly signed contracts with a nonprofit where her husband works in senior leadership. I'll discuss this latest bombshell report with SOLEDAD URSUA, who is a Venice Neighborhood Council board member and one of the front lines of the homeless crisis in Los Angeles. But first, on your money, the markets, the economy, inflation, gold, crypto, geopolitics, politics, the whole works now. Joining us live, the one and only Steve Forbes, chairman and editor-in-chief of Forbes Media, co-author of the book Inflation, What It Is, Why It Is Bad, and How to Fix It. Also former Republican presidential candidate, big tax reform advocate, too. Steve Forbes, good afternoon to you, sir.
Good to be with you. Thank you.
Wonderful to have you with us today, and you wrote the book on inflation, so let's get your reaction to that big news on inflation that came out first thing this morning.
Well, I think what it underscores is that amazingly the Federal Reserve, our central bank, remains clueless about inflation. They still seem to think that a vibrant economy causes inflation, which is why Chairman Powell has indicated there'll be no cuts in interest rates, which raises a bunch of questions. One is, why is he trying to manipulate interest rates? Why does he think prosperity causes? And that question, Why does he think prosperity causes inflation? Inflation's very definition, monetary inflation, is undermining or reducing the value of your currency, in this case the dollar, usually by creating too many of them. And so what we've seen in recent months, Frank, is that commodity prices have gone up generally, not oil, but other commodity prices. The indexes are up. That's not a good sign. And the gold price, as you mentioned, is hovering around record levels. And that's a warning sign about the state of the dollar. And yet the Federal Reserve is oblivious to it. So I think you're going to see a real clash coming in the months ahead between the administration and the Federal Reserve, not over the Federal Reserve's independence, not over specific interest rates, but does the Fed operating by the right model? What it should focus on is a stable value for the dollar and not trying to manipulate the economy.
On the air live with Steve Forbes, taking a closer look at that inflation report today. The CPI Consumer Price Index showed price of eggs skyrocketing. Does Fed Chairman Jerome Powell have egg on his face, having lowered interest rates several times last year? Stood pat this time around recently, but did the Fed blow it here?
We might say it's no yoke, but the Federal Reserve does not realize there are two kinds of inflation: non-monetary inflation and monetary inflation. Non-monetary inflation is something like bird flu, which affects the supply of birds, of hens, and so we're getting a severe egg shortage because of that disease. And there's nothing the Fed can do about that. Manipulating interest rates is not going to have suddenly more chickens show up and laying more eggs. That's something out of their hands. But the Federal Reserve can do something about monetary inflation. That is the integrity of the dollar. And while the dollar looks strong against other currencies, when you compare the dollar and other currencies to something like gold or general commodity prices, you could say today that in the world, most currencies are junk currencies. All are going down in real value. We happen to be in better shape than the others, but it's a pretty poor shape. Baseball season is going to be in the news pretty soon, catchers and pitchers and the like, and it would be like the top hitter in a league hitting 220, maybe at the top of the list, but it's a pretty poor average. And that's where the dollar is today, hitting 220.
That is an excellent point, and you reminded me. I remember I was at the Frankfurt airport years ago at the currency exchange desk there, and somebody in front of me was trying to exchange Russian rubles, and the guy behind the desk said, "You might as well throw them away." Which brings me to the point here now. President Trump speaking to Vladimir Putin today, and it was brought up recently that the Russian economy is about the size of Italy, and they're finally, according to the Wall Street Journal, talking about finally settling this horrific Ukraine-Russia war. Give us your reaction to that big news here today.
Well, I think it's the recognition of President Trump has made it very clear he wants a negotiated peace. The fact that they may meet in Saudi Arabia, I think, shows two things. One is that Russia is trying to move away from its close alliance with Iran. They see that now as a loser regime. And I think it also means that Saudi Arabia is ready to cut a deal on the so-called Abraham Accords, where eventually you may get recognition, which would have been inconceivable a few years ago, of Saudi Arabia and Israel. As for the Ukraine war itself, we've had some from Hegseth, our new defense secretary, and other officials, including the president, saying some pretty harsh words to Ukraine and President Zelensky there. So I want to see what actually they think they're going to negotiate. Because the fact of the matter is Vladimir Putin has suffered a huge setback there, but he has not lost his ambitions. He knows that he's got to get something out of this war. And I just hope we conclude a peace that is durable and lasting. And I think there is growing recognition. That means there's going to have to be stationed in Ukraine about 100,000 troops, not our troops, but British, French, and other European troops to make sure that this war does not resume. Paper pieces mean nothing. You have to have real force to counter potential force in the future. So I want to see what the details are. I think there will be an agreement in the months ahead, but the details are going to determine whether this is a false peace or a real durable peace.
On the Live with Steve Forbes, and turning to the Middle East now, a deadline of noon Saturday has been put down by President Trump for all of the hostages to be released by Hamas, which took those hostages on October 7, 2023, when which started the Hamas-Israel war. What do you think is going to happen this weekend?
Well, the fact that both the Israelis and the U.S. are saying release the remaining hostages or else demonstrates they think that most of the hostages are not alive. We saw the horrific condition of the 3 hostages released as if they'd come out of a concentration camp and the tortures that they had undergone. And so I think you're going to see a resumption of real operations, military operations against Hamas, and I wouldn't be surprised if actions are maybe taken against some Iranian assets. Iran controls Hamas, and I hope behind the scenes they're telling the Iranians, you better get them to give up the hostages, or there are going to be consequences not only for Hamas but for Iran itself.
It's been an eventful 3 weeks since President Trump took office. In front of the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, he announced the idea there that Gaza should be rebuilt with U.S. help and turning it into a Riviera. What's your reaction to that idea?
Well, I'm not yet ready to buy beachfront in Gaza, but I think that there's a realization. We're not going to have Gaza as a territory in a 51st state, but that the putting of the Palestinians there years and years ago, instead of letting them integrate in other countries, as should have been done in the late 1940s, instead of putting them in camps or areas that have no economic future. And I think one of the things that happened, one reason why the King of Jordan left without not a big smile, is that he's going to have to take some of these Palestinians, not many, because Jordan already has a very large Palestinian population. But I think you're going to see real pressure on Saudi Arabia and Egypt, especially Egypt, to take these Palestinians, let them relocate, and begin a new life, instead of being stuck in what was a virtual prison in Gaza. So in terms of rebuilding, that's going to take years, and it'll be a test of President Trump's negotiating prowess to get the Gulf states, the oil states, including Saudi Arabia, to finance the reconstruction there.
In all this, we should note the price of oil has moved lower, and I'll be discussing oil later this hour with John KILDUFF, prominent oil industry analyst. But what about Iran and all this? And certainly under the new Trump administration, looks like maximum pressure will be put on Iran once again.
That's right, and that could affect what I think you're going to see already. It's beginning underway, is that Iran's no longer going to be selling oil. It was part of an embargo that was put in years ago, but the Biden administration never took away the sanctions. They just winked and nodded to Iran to sell the oil, most of it to China. So the Iranians collected some 80 to 100 billion dollars, not the people, but the mullahs, the murderous mullahs. And that'll have some impact, but the real impact on oil is going to be traditional supply and demand. The economies of the world are not doing very well. Hopefully that'll change, but I think we're going to have to show the way by what we do here. Europe is just stuck in a rut. Japan's stuck in a rut. China's got problems. But at the same time, I think you're going to see output in the United States start to increase, especially as barriers are removed on liquefied on natural gas. As you know, we're the biggest natural gas country in the world, and we should be exporting it. And the funny thing is that China imports a lot of oil and gas, and probably won't be direct from the U.S., but a lot of the natural gas we're going to be producing in the next 5 to 7 years is going to end up through third parties into China. That's a good position for us to have China indirectly dependent on the U.S. for its energy needs.
On the line with Steve Forbes, and last time I checked the Forbes list of billionaires, Elon Musk was well ahead of everyone else, above $400 billion at last check. He's certainly taken a prominent role in the Trump administration here and operating DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency. What's your reaction to what's unfolded in recent weeks?
Well, I think it's a realization by Donald Trump, learning the lessons of his first term, is that if you're going to make a change, you have to move very quickly. And Musk, being an entrepreneur, knows that you're going to have some trips and falls along the way. But if you're not moving fast, you're not going to reach big goals. And I think what I think is going to actually come is there'll be some spending changes, cuts, but deregulation. It's amazing how many crazy rules we have on the books that have hurt businesses. Regulations are a form of taxation, and I think you're going to see major changes. You're already starting to see that. And so, but it's not a bad thing to find out in a minute way where our money is going. And they say, well, it's what they've uncovered is not big money. Well, it's not big money by trillion-dollar standards, but it's astonishing money going for things that people couldn't conceive, like college tuition for a terrorist, that we should know about. So I think transparency and change is coming. So there's not going to be cutbacks on terms of programs that provide people a safety net. It's going to be truly for the first time. They all talk about fraud, waste, and abuse and all that kind of thing. I think you're going to see real progress made in ferreting where this money is going, especially in something like Medicare and Medicaid, where experts say probably $100 billion a year is fraudulent. That's real money.
What do you, billion here, billion there. What about on tax reform? Of course, you have taken the lead over the years trying to simplify America's taxes and at the business level as well as the individual level. What do you see ahead under the Trump administration on the tax front?
Well, this is where the president's going to have to intervene in coming days because the House Republicans and the Senate Republicans, some of them are, I think, fumbling the ball. And I think the president is right in indicating that they should do one gigantic bill and pass it as soon as possible, not only renewing the tax cuts of 2017. As you know, many of them are expiring most of them are expiring at the end of the year, and adding new tax cuts, not just tips and Social Security, nice as that may be, but also a reduction in personal income tax rates, and also a reduction in the capital gains tax. The nice thing about reducing the capital gains tax rate is that you get immediate revenue. It's not like other tax cuts, which may take a year or two to have an effect on the economy. But every time we reduce capital gains tax rates, we have instant revenue coming into the government. Why? Because more people start to realize gains they had but were afraid to take because of the high tax rate. So if they reduce that rate to 15%, it's now almost 24% on the federal level. In poor California, you go in the stratosphere. But if you lower it to something like 15%, a lot of people will take gains because the tax price is low and redeploy the assets elsewhere. So the government will get literally billions of new revenue instantly.
On the Air Live with Steve Forbes. And speaking of California, as we discussed last time you were on the Air Live with us here, the staggering, devastating, horrific, and deadly wildfires that we saw here in Southern California. The latest estimate of total economic loss from the wildfires has now ballooned to more than $250 billion. I know you have many friends and even relatives here in this area. Hope everyone's okay in this current emergency where we're experiencing rain and possible mudslides here. What's your reaction to this epic disaster here and the impact on the economy?
Well, obviously, we don't control the weather, but it's very clear, too, huge policy mistakes have been made over the years, including not clearing the brush. That any land manager would tell you that if you don't clear that brush, it's going to build up into something that explodes. And so California paid a severe, unnecessary price on that. The water policies, why the state continues to flush almost half of its annual rainfall into the Pacific Ocean, is something that's very baffling. So I think you're going to see coming from this eventually, yes, there'll be money having to come in to help people get back on their feet. But also, I think you're going to see insurance reform so people can actually have insurance at an affordable price instead of the crazy regulations California has now. But also, I think you're going to see changes in the water policy, like having reservoirs and more infrastructure, so you don't have, when a drought comes along, you don't have the crazy things that happened in recent years. Allowing utilities to cut underbrush of, I think it's 50 feet or something from the lines now. It should be 500 feet or 1,000. So we don't have these unnecessary fires that come when you get sparks from the electricity wires.
Steve Forbes, wish we had more time. As always, we are very grateful for your time this afternoon on another busy news day here. Thank you very, very much for taking the call here this afternoon.
Thank you, and good luck, and hope the rain is less lethal than what happened with those dreadful fires.
Absolutely. Well, we'll keep an open line to you and hope to speak with you again very soon. The one and only Steve Forbes, Chairman, Editor-in-Chief of Forbes Media and author of Inflation, the book he wrote in recent years, Inflation, What It Is, Why It Is Bad, and How to Fix It. Also, tax reform advocate extraordinaire and former Republican presidential candidate. It's always an honor to have Steve Forbes with us live here on Mottek On Money, 790 KBC. Frank Mottek here. Did you know that for more than 10,000 years, gold has been the greatest store of value and considered a safe haven asset to preserve your wealth? Now, with the U.S. debt at more than $36 trillion and climbing, nervousness about the economy and the development of the digital dollar, central bank digital currency, it's more critical now than ever before to safeguard your assets like your cash savings and retirement accounts with physical gold. Opening a gold IRA is one of the best ways to secure your wealth and create a stable financial future. Stop worrying about your retirement in the market and cash savings in the bank. Feel confident, prepared, and in control with physical gold and silver. Give Joe Morgan a call now. The number is 1-800-753-8534. Mention Frank Mottek, and you could get $1,000 worth of silver with a qualifying purchase. Call now, 1-800-753-8534, or visit UnitedGoldGroup.com. Good afternoon. Mottek On Money continues here, 790 KABC. Mixed finish to the day on Wall Street with the Dow down 225 to 44,369 in reaction to the latest Consumer Price Index, which came in hot today, hotter than expected on the inflation front. The S&P 500 down 16.5 at 6,052, and the NASDAQ up 6 at 19,650. The price of gold continuing to hover at or near all-time highs, right now at $2,926.90 an ounce. Oil pulling back slightly now at $71.24 a barrel, down 13 cents. The yield in the 10-year note, by the way, the highest we've seen in 3 weeks, also in reaction to the Consumer Price Index, hotter than expected. The yield in the 10-year note, which impacts the fixed-rate mortgage rates out there, moving higher to 4.63%, up from 4.54% just yesterday. CVS, the drugstore chain, having its best day since 1999, popping more than $8 at 63 and change. Turning to the cryptos now, we see a Bitcoin up about 600 to 97,684, Ethereum up 50 at 2,732, and Doge at 26 cents. And now the latest news on 790 KABC. Mottek On Money continues here in 790 KABC. New attention on how public funds are being spent in Los Angeles on the homeless crisis. LA's top city homeless services executive, the chief executive of the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority, LAHSA, reportedly signed contracts with the nonprofit where her husband works in senior leadership. LAist reports documents show Felicia Adams Kellum, the chief executive at the LAHSA Group, signed a $2.1 million contract and 2 other contract amendments with Upward Bound House, the Santa Monica-based nonprofit where her husband Edward Kellum works in senior leadership. According to the LAist report, the contract names Adams Kellum as the LAHSA official authorized to administer it. A LAHSA spokesman telling LAist the contracts had inadvertently ended up in front of Adams Kellum to sign. The report says LAist findings come amid mounting questions about oversight at LAHSA, the public agency tasked by the city of Los Angeles and Los Angeles County with administering more than $700 million in annual contracts with nonprofits to provide homeless services. It's a creation of the city and county and jointly funded and overseen by both. following the story very closely in this bombshell report. Joining us live now, SOLEDAD URSUA, who is a Venice Neighborhood Council board member on one of the front lines of the homeless crisis in Los Angeles, Venice, which has seen homeless encampments, encampment fires, RV fires, crime, and the list goes on. SOLEDAD, thank you very much for taking the call. And what's your reaction to this report out today?
So I am not shocked. Let's remind everyone that Los Angeles is basically a pay-to-play city. If you ain't paying, you ain't playing. So Felicia, she actually comes from Venice. Before she made it to the CEO of LAHSA, the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority, she came from Venice from St. Joseph's organization, where she was one of the head honchos. She was a great friend of Mayor Karen Bass. And when she did get her, basically promotion to LAHSA, her salary was nearly doubled. And we see that that's happening, time and time again among LA city officials who are friends with Bass. Another great example is Janice Quinones from LADWP, where she was brought on under the direction of Mayor Bass, and her salary was nearly doubled. So what we're seeing here is that there is a pattern where Mayor Bass is bringing in her friends, and Felicia Adams is one of them. But we're also seeing that there is a history of kickbacks, abuse, and fraud just going on in LA. And so what would be really great for basically the LA residents is the own version of Doge. That would be very amazing here. We're seeing that this kind of waste, fraud, and abuse is happening on a level that we've never seen here.
Any talk about doging this agency and City Hall, for that matter, to see where the money really goes here?
The problem is that LAHSA is actually a contractor itself. So LAHSA has an annual budget of over $1 billion. $1 billion in federal, local, and state funding, and that it has performance metrics that are less than 1%. So this is something where, we really should look into this. I hope that the feds pull out. I hope that HUD pulls its money out. But this is a $1 billion annual failure. And who is benefiting? It's obviously not the homeless people living on the street. It might be people who are related to the contractors who are working through this or who are at the agency. So basically, LAHSA is just a big contractor who gets these deals. And unfortunately, we're seeing a lot of nepotism here.
What is the situation in Venice? Give us an update on what's happening there.
So, what's hilarious here is just that we've followed this for so long. There's a great Twitter feed, Venice Intel, and they have been basically documenting Felicia since she's been here, working for us. It's funny that she's always adorned with pearls. Last year, she went with her husband to the Super Bowl. So there's all these photos of her, and she's quickly deleted all of her accounts. So in Venice, we've actually seen this because we're literally living on the front ends. We deal with homelessness on a day-to-day basis. So we see this stuff is being abused. And what's crazy is that there's really no checks and balances, that everyone knows that this is a failing system, and people like Felicia just keep being promoted. So it's horrible, just especially in Venice, nothing gets any better.
Where does the buck stop with all of this? Is it Mayor Bass who's supposed to be overseeing these matters? And what's your reaction to the explanation that LAHSA has given to LAist for how this happened?
Well, everybody says that it's not their fault, and nobody wants any oversight. It really should go to Mayor Bass. She is the mayor of Los Angeles, but let's think about these, basically advantageous salaries. We just found out that with Steve Soboroff and one of his aides, that there was something like $750,000 for the two of them that should be paid out in salaries over 90 days. 90 days. $500,000 and $250,000 for Soboroff and his aide. So these are the kind of relationships that Mayor Bass is used to, where she is giving out or doling out these great contracts to friends. So she just doesn't understand. Or maybe she does understand, but I don't think so. But she's handing out these contracts to people who don't know what they're doing. And really, the person who's losing here is the taxpayer, because that's who's paying for all of this.
Right, which means Mr. and Mrs. Southern California listening to all this here right now. And after that report came out that Steve Soberoff was going to be paid $500,000 for 90 days of work, apparently that deal has been nullified and supposedly is going to be working for free now. What's your reaction to that?
My reaction is that I love it. And what do we need? We need sunshine. We need sunshine onto the books of everything in California and Los Angeles. That is really how we are going to expose all this corruption. So I love what Elon Musk is doing with President Trump to basically do Doge. But what is needed so much is basically that same version for California and specifically Los Angeles, because we see that these contracts, let's look specifically at Felicia. I mean, with her family members, it is waste, fraud, and abuse, and it's happening at a crazy level. So what we need really here is, we need Elon Musk to come to California and launch Doge here.
Soledad, thank you very much for coming to the line on this big story. I'm sure folks will be hearing more about it. It's not being widely reported, but LAist did break this story, and it looks like it is getting more attention finally now. Soledad URSUA, who is a Venice Neighborhood Council board member on the front lines of the homeless crisis here in the Los Angeles area. Thank you very much for joining us live here this afternoon.
Thank you.
Out to the freeways now on this rainy afternoon on 790 KABC. Mottek On Money continues here in 790 KABC. Good afternoon. President Trump said today he had a highly productive call with Russian President Vladimir Putin, and both were open to immediate talks to end the war in Ukraine, according to the Wall Street Journal. In reaction, we saw the price of oil drop 2% after the president called Putin and Zelensky to discuss ending the war in Ukraine, according to the Wall Street Journal. The price of oil slipping to $71.27 in New York, and the global benchmark Brent crude in London now just below $75 a barrel. Also, big news here in California. Chevron, which is planning to relocate its headquarters from California to Houston soon, also announced today that they'll be laying off about 15 to 20% of its workforce starting this year. Chevron vowing to save between $2 and $3 billion by next year, and the energy giant is closing layoffs as part of that plan. Chevron taking action to simplify their organizational structure, execute faster and more effectively, and position the company for stronger long-term competitiveness, according to a statement from Chevron. Joining us live now on these big stories, John KILDUFF, oil industry analyst at Again Capital, also CNBC contributor and longtime contributor on this program. John KILDUFF, good afternoon to you, sir.
Good afternoon, Frank. Good to speak with you again.
Wonderful to speak with you, and give us your reaction to the latest news here. Of course, also in the mix, nervous time in the Middle East with the deadline set of 12 noon Saturday for the remaining hostages to be released by Hamas, which were taken after the Hamas terrorists attacked Israel back on October 7th, 2023. Give us your reaction to these latest developments.
I'll tell you, Frank, President Trump is keeping us on our toes here in the oil market these days, much like he did in his first term, I have to say. So we're somewhat used to it, those of us who toiled during that time period. Look, I had been saying that there was a lot of downward pressure on oil prices when he first got reelected, and everybody was singing the catchphrase of "drill, baby, drill." I was warning that we needed to be a little cautious on that, because the industry might be a reluctant warrior in that, but also, too, that sanctions, baby, sanctions might, in fact, be the rejoinder, and we have started to see that. The various sanctions that President Biden put on in his late days of his administration, the EU, and then President Trump even doubling down on some of those, really generated a bit of a rally here in oil prices. Your listeners might have noticed it at the pump here as we've been creeping higher. Yeah. And it has had an impact. I mean, we are seeing buyers in India and China step back from buying crude oil from Russia. There's Russian tankers that are starting to build up on the high seas along with Iranian tankers. But today's news about Putin and Russia changed all that outlook, because if President Trump is sweating or worried about oil prices going up, a deal with Putin in any way, shape, or form here could ease things and turn that dynamic right on its head.
All right, and the president has also taken a hard line once again against Iran. What about that dynamic and the potential impact on gas and oil prices?
Well, it's another major input here into the price dynamic, Frank. Look, this threat as well about Saturday at noon, all hell breaking loose. There's fears that turns into a wider, situation in the Middle East. This push to move the Palestinians out of the Gaza Strip into other parts of the Middle East also got some pushback from, President Trump's historic allies, especially the Saudis. But the Saudis appear ready, willing, and able to host this meeting between President Putin and President Trump. So again, a lot of moving parts here, but the clampdown on Iran, the clampdown on Russia, and the clampdown that's looming on Venezuela as well, Chevron could be hurt by that because Venezuela, the country, owes the company billions of dollars in money, and that they were recouping some of that with eased sanctions on Venezuela to get oil out of there, and Chevron getting it into its refineries. So a lot going on here. There's a lot of oil supply hanging in the balance, and I think you're going to see a lot of volatility in the oil price. Certainly, it's hard to see prices going much below $70 a barrel in New York. And I think we were on a trip higher, above 80 here, with all the worries that came racing into this market that were extinguished in today's announcements about potential meetings with President Putin.
Very interesting. And as you properly noted, you're absolutely right. Meanwhile, gas prices here in Southern California have been rising. We did get that hotter than expected inflation reading today. The consumer price index coming in hot for the month of January, and that impacted the markets today as well. Looking at the latest AAA fuel gauge survey, regular gas in L.A. averaging $4.72 a gallon now, premium at $5.08 a gallon, and looks like that's about 20 cents a gallon higher than where it was just a week ago. What do you see ahead for gas prices here?
I think they're going to trend a bit higher, Frank. We have to be concerned about it. I will tell you that in that inflation reading this morning, that one of the major components that helped boost the index was the heating fuel component, the distillate fuel component, the diesel fuel component. It's been a very cold winter so far out here in December and January. It's driven the price of natural gas quite a bit higher, and that translates or dovetails into a higher diesel fuel price or heating oil price, because a lot of places can switch between the two fuels. So when natural gas gets too expensive, they hit the generator that uses diesel fuel, just to give you some background on that. But I think, like I said, for now, I don't see us going much below 70. We're going to have to see how some of these elements in the market pan out. But for now, the pressure's on supply finally because of these new sanctions that were imposed by EU, Biden, and Trump. To squeeze Russia, to squeeze Iran, and like I said, the looming squeeze on Venezuela.
John Kilduff, oil industry analyst at Again Capital, also CNBC contributor, and we greatly appreciate you being a longtime contributor in this program. John, thank you very much for joining us live here this afternoon.
My pleasure, Frank. Good speaking with you.
Likewise, thank you very much, John Kilduff, and stay tuned now for the 790 KBC News Blitz with Randy Wang. I'll be back with more at 4 tomorrow afternoon right here on Mottek On Money on 790 KBC.
Former U.S. Navy SEAL Sean Ryan captures real stories about sacrifice and strength.
My biggest fear wasn't death. My biggest fear was nobody will remember me.
That motivates a lot of people.
It just made me feel invincible.
Open the steel door and just... They were all convinced, I think, that they were about to die.
This rush of stress comes over me because now it's soul time.
All of a sudden I'm saying, what is really important?
Let us reveal the truth of ourselves.
That's it.
The Sean Ryan Show. Follow and listen on your favorite platform.